LinkedIn presents.
This is the Forbes Books podcast, conversations with folks who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I'm joined by an individual who knows the true power of transformation in the business world. His name is David Paragamian. Dave is the CEO of Health Monitor Network, but he also self-identifies as storyteller-in-chief. And in his new book, Coming About, he shares the highs and lows of his 30-year career and distills them in what he calls the 3 C's: culture, communication, and competitive advantage. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you, Dave. And I want to start with the book because it was just released. And I know as a published author myself how it's almost like giving birth, like once you've released that book, because it's a long journey. So take me back to the start of that trek and why you wrote the book and how it feels that now it's out in the world.
You know, the genesis of the book was about 2.5 years ago. I came and joined Health Monitor, which is a really wonderful legacy print media company in the healthcare space, in the health media space. And it's a company that has got wonderful products and people, but very clearly needed to make the pivot, make the transformation to a full digital-first marketing platform. And so that's what we did. I've really enjoyed over the last 2.5 years taking a legacy print media company and transforming it into a 21st century digital-first marketing platform for our healthcare, pharmaceutical marketing clients. And along the way, what I thought was, this is part and parcel of the narrative that I've built for my life, which has been about transforming and building. These things only make sense when you look backwards over your resume. They don't make sense looking forward on your resume. But now that I look back, I realize whether I was in corporate life at Roche and they asked me to rebuild a sales organization, or whether I was at Publicis and they asked me to resuscitate a declining advertising agency, and now transforming this business, that what I am as a business person is somebody that likes to take something and change it, transform it, and take it to a different place. And so it's been a wonderful ride here as we've made a good company an even better digital company. And so I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to put that on the page, share some of the, I don't want to use the word secrets, but some of the things that I have learned along the way doing this a couple of times, and some of the things that have made us so successful here at Health Monitor. I wanted to make sure that those got chronicled.
And it doesn't sound like you were like me, like you weren't a book bucket list guy. It didn't seem like in your list of things to do in your life that one day there's going to be a David Paragamian book. Is that the case? Am I analyzing you correctly?
Totally correct.
And now that you've done it, you're like, oh yeah, I am a book guy.
Well, I'm a guy that likes to tell a good story, and if that turns out to be on a book, so be it. But I think we've certainly got a great story here.
Mm-mm. And speaking of story, I know you like to use the phrase storyteller-in-chief. Could you give me a little idea of what that means to you?
Sure. I think as I've gone to increasing levels of responsibility in any organization, what I realize is it isn't about what I can do. There are only a certain number of hours in a day, and I only have 2 hands. So it's really important to create a vision and a purpose for the entire team around me. So I think that to me, that becomes being the storyteller in chief, making sure people know that they are building the Notre Dame Cathedral and not just cutting stone. And that's something that I think people need to hear often. I think about the preacher doesn't just preach salvation one Sunday out of the year. The preacher preaches it 52 Sundays out of the year. And I think borrowing that metaphor here into the corporate world, I think people need to know the why of what they're doing and the purpose of what they're doing ongoing. Because some days are hard days. Some weeks are hard weeks. It doesn't matter what business you're in. Sometimes the day is long and the road is steep. And so I think making sure people are connected to the purpose and to the vision and feeling really good and excited about what they're doing, I think makes all the difference in the world. And so that's why I think the title that I'm most proud of is the Storyteller in Chief.
And in the book, you break it down to simply the 3 C's: culture, communication, and competitive advantage. And it's funny, Dave, I've been doing, business podcasts for 3 years, and Gen Xer, the idea of culture for us, like the word, in the 80s and early 90s was not even a thing. And now you can't survive without a good company culture. And I know the cultures existed back then, but the idea of having an intentional culture didn't seem like it was top of mind in the olden times. Can you talk about how the culture and the idea of culture in business has transformed during your 30-year career?
Yeah, you're exactly right. When I started, no one talked about the C word. No one talked about culture. They talked about the hard KPIs. We're going to drive revenue. We're going to cut costs. We're going to launch X number of products. We're going to build the organization from X people to Y people. But we didn't talk about culture. It was seen as something from the liberal arts side of the campus, not the STEM side of the campus. And business was always built on, the hard quantitative side of the ledger. But I think, as you say, it's become really obvious in the last, decade or more that intentionality of culture really matters. And by that, I think it has to be deeply rooted and deeply felt from top to bottom. So many folks think that culture is, let's go have a community service event. Let's give everybody a mug with a logo on it. Let's make a donation once a year to a really worthy charitable 501c3 organization in our community. And those are all great things. I love a good mug with a logo. I love a good T-shirt from our day painting houses in the community. But there are 363 other days of the year where the things we do and the things we believe and the way we speak to people and the way we give feedback or don't give feedback really matters. And so it goes way beyond a mug with a logo. It goes way beyond putting a ping pong table in a break room. It really is about how we think, how we speak, how we hire, how we give feedback, the choices that we make. And so I think for me, culture is the absolute most important driver of everything. I never finish a board meeting without saying that all of the quantitative metrics are really outcomes of having gotten the culture right.
I love that. And Dave, it's funny you say that because this is so important to me is that when I see companies preach culture, they preach culture by putting up posters with like the mission statements for the company and everything like that. And I believe, to me, the way I see that, Dave, is they're trying to quantify culture. They're like, okay, I don't know how to make a culture into a KPI, but I can make it into these words, and then these words will become a reality, and then they try to culture it to existence. Do you see that as a problem sometimes where people are just like, hey, you know what our culture is going to be? Let's put it on a poster.
Yeah, totally. That's the world's best boss mug that Michael Scott at Dunder Mifflin carried, right?
Right.
That's the, before Whole Foods became part of Amazon, that was the set of adjectives that hung above the cash register until they didn't. And we put new adjectives above the cash register 3 weeks later, right? So I think that's the stuff that makes people cynical and skeptical and raise an eyebrow about culture. And then there are organizations, obviously, that really do it right. I mean, so you can't walk into a Johnson & Johnson organization anywhere in the world that doesn't have the credo on the wall that says our first responsibility is to the mothers and fathers and the doctors and the nurses that are using our products. And it leaves all the way down to the bottom of the credo to talk about after we've taken care of our employees and the communities, the business should earn a fair profit. And it was during the Tylenol crisis in the 80s when now deceased chairman Jim Burke, sitting in the conference room there in New Brunswick at night deciding what to do with the tainted Tylenol capsule issue from Chicago, said, well, no. We're not taking back the product from Walgreens. We're not taking back the product from Chicago. We're not taking back the product from the Midwest. We're taking back the product in every single store in the world, and we're taking it all back, because that's what the credo would tell us to do. That's the North Point on our compass. We're going to go do the right thing, and then we'll figure out how we can get Tylenol back in the marketplace. And so I think there are companies that really believe it in their soul, starting at the top, like the Tylenol example in the 80s with Jim Burke. And then there are folks that can't wait to create another coffee mug for the Dunder Mifflin folks.
I'm glad you brought up the Tylenol story, because to me, that, even though I still use Tylenol to this day, the words Tylenol and cyanide are like embedded in my brain till I think to the day I die. Yet, I still buy Tylenol. Johnson & Johnson survived. Tylenol is still a huge product. No one hesitates to even buy Tylenol. And I know you mentioned the way they handled it in terms of like stripping off the shelves. But in this day and age, Dave, if something like that happened to a company, that's like their death knell. They'd be over with. Why do you think they were able to survive that? Because even to this day, like I said, I still remember it, but I'm not afraid to use Tylenol. But I just imagine if that happened today, that company would be dead. How do you think they were able to survive that?
That's a great question. A couple things. One is I believe that brand equity of a company, of a brand, even a person, because we all have our own personal brand. Brand equity is like a piggy bank into which you put pennies every day, and you start accreting more value and more value and more value. And so Johnson & Johnson was a 100-year-old company when the Tylenol crisis happened in the 1980s that had accreted a lot of value, a lot of pennies in the piggy bank of trust and responsibility, good ethical behavior, high quality products, et cetera, et cetera. And so you take the legacy of all of that deposits in the bank, and then you take really good decision making and leadership that was grounded in that we're going to do the right thing that's based on that credo, regardless of the short-term financial impact of the company. And they were able to, again, not only survive, but thrive coming through that. And I think, of course, today you see lots of organizations that just can't. And I think it stems from what you said, which is some people think that culture is a veneer you could put over something. It's not, right? If the CEO stands on the shore in Louisiana and says, I just want to get on with my life. I'm really tired of being in a cruddy hotel room while we try and clean up this mess. It takes a long time for people to want to go buy gas at a BP station. And that's a commodity product that sometimes you're just searching for the most available, cheapest gas, on the freeway. But, that one is indelibly etched in memories. And I know people that to this day won't buy BP gas because of the really stupid thing that the CEO said standing there at the mess. And so I think culture is just that thing that has to be lived like the blood that courses through your veins, and it's not a slogan. It's not a strap line. It's not a coffee mug with a logo. It's not veneer you put on the walls. You have to really live it every day, and it has to start at the top.
Mm-hmm. And that sort of connects with the second C of the three C's. And this is sort of my expertise, and that's communication. Why do companies, especially that are led by really, really smart people who are incredibly well educated, why does the communication piece seem to really bog people down? Is it because it gets down to the humanness of it, where we're just all so different and we have trouble communicating sometimes? Where do you think that the second C, communication, comes into when it comes to building a great company?
I think the communication in some ways gets just taken for granted. So we talked about how culture was just ignored for a long time. I think communication, people are aware. We've been handing out masters in communications for the better part of 100 years probably, but people take for granted that communication is that fundamental bedrock in everything. And if you ask any divorce lawyer how he or she earns their living, they're going to tell you it's thanks to poor communication between spouse A and spouse B. That communication it isn't really about your mother-in-law is too intrusive, and isn't really about you spent too much money on golf. It isn't really about that you left the toilet seat up. It's that you're a crappy communicator about your needs and your expectations and your feelings and your desire. And so I think communication is so critical. And I think in the corporate world, it gets exacerbated because we sometimes think, well, I can't say that. I know that person X did a really poor job on this, but I can't pull person X aside and say, hey, while we value you and respect you, I have to tell you that the work you did on this wasn't good, and I need you to redo it. I think about so many corporations I've seen where rather than tell the employee something's not right, we say, well, let's hire a coach and get them a 360 so that anonymously on a piece of paper, we can tell them that they did something wrong, but we would hate to look them in the eye and tell them they did something wrong. And I think far better, my personal style is to be as blunt as a Navy battleship. Let me just tell you, look, I value you. I respect you. This work isn't right. I need you to redo it. Or, hey, this work is fantastic and I'm super grateful, that sort of thing. But I think that communication of expectation, the clarity of that, the consistency of that, so important. And I think the other thing in corporate life is people are hesitant to bring forward difficult news, bad news, things they're worried about. They think they need to try and solve the problem before they bring it up the command chain. And I think I'd much rather hear bad news and say, okay, how do we solve this together? What ideas do you have? What ideas do I have based on my experience? But, hiding bad news, it never ends well.
And it's funny too, Dave, the communication infrastructure in companies is so wonky because you've got Slack, you've got email, you've got the project management software where people exchange notes. And then they do all of that, but actually speak to a human being in real life. Do you feel like technology sometimes wonkifies communication because it's so much easier to just send a Slack or send an email than to actually speak to somebody?
It's funny. Yes is the short answer, and the longer answer is what I find is that by the end of the day, if I've had a good day, I may have written 10 emails, but I've had way more conversations. And so my first instinct is, let me walk down the hall and see the person. Let me pick up the phone and call the client, because you can convey so much more with the tone of your voice, the tilt of your head, the way you're communicating, both physical, nonverbal, et cetera, with someone. You can convey much more intentionality, much more partnership in a conversation than in a 3-line email that you're rapping out as fast as you can with your thumbs. So I tend to think you're right. The nature of, well, it's so much easier to just send a text, a Slack, an email, versus let me walk down the hall and look someone in the eyes. But I do think that when it's possible, looking someone in the eyes is the best communication.
And lastly, now we get into your businessy side of your 3 C's, and that's competitive advantage. Break that one down for me.
Sure. I think whether you're a divorce attorney in Des Moines, Iowa, or whether you're a giant soap company on the banks of the Ohio River, or you're an advertising agency in New York, you've got a product or a service that you're trying to sell. And my guess is there are other people who have competitive products and services that they are trying to sell that are substitutes for your product. And so one of the things that I've learned over the years is a phrase I've borrowed from the current CEO of Johnson & Johnson, John Mueller, who said, we want our products to be irresistibly superior. And by that, of course, what John Mueller meant was he wanted consumers at the shelf to be willing to pay a few cents more for Crest than Colgate, because it's that superior a product, whether it's the packaging, the flavor, the ADA seal, whatever it is about Crest, he wanted that to be imbued into the brand so that the person at the shelf would say, yeah, no, I have to have Crest in my cart, not the other brand. And I think that applies in our business as an advertising media company, so that clients want to engage with us and say, no, this is a company because of the people, the products, the service, the cultural value, and the way they engage with me that makes them a superior product versus the alternatives. And I think that applies in any walk of life, in any business.
And lastly, Dave, about you personally, you've mentioned and this is me just sort of getting your impressions of you. You're a turnaround guy. You're a guy that people come in and be like, Dave, we need you to turn this around. You're pivoting before pivoting was cool. Is that what sort of fuels you, or do you like to be like, hey, I like things settled, I like things running everything smoothly, or does that turnaround, is that still attractive to you at this point in your career?
You're totally right. I love the adrenaline of the turnaround, the change, the transformation. I love trying to land the plane on the pitch and carrier deck in the middle of the night. And the idea of flying the plane between New York and Paris at 30,000 feet on autopilot is really boring to me. I really enjoy the concept of how do we create a burning platform for change? How do we paint an exciting vision that everyone can get behind and realize that makes their lives better, their clients' lives better, and get everyone pulling for that and working hard for that, and to see the progress toward that end. So turnaround may be too strong a word. I think transformation may be a more generous word in the sense that something doesn't have to be broken to be pivoted and transformed. You can take something that's good and make it even better and make it great and make it more future-proof, which is certainly what I believe we've done here at Health Monitor. But I absolutely agree with you. I think that my resume is that of a transformer, or somebody that likes to take something and change it. So landing the F-14 on one engine in the middle of the night in the Indian Ocean, that sounds really cool. And taking the United Airlines flight on autopilot to Charles de Gaulle, not that interesting.
All right, well, I'd rather be on the autopilot one, Dave. Don't get me. I still like you, but I don't like all that other stuff. That stuff sounds too scary to me. But you don't.
Yeah, every once in a while, once a year, it's good to be on United Airlines on autopilot to Charles de Gaulle.
His name is David Paragamian. He's the CEO of Health Monitor Network and the author of the new book, Coming About. Dave, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Forbes Books podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. That way you'll receive new episodes as soon as they're available. And if you have a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review on Apple or Spotify, which would help other exceptional entrepreneurs like you discover the show. You can always connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.